Hello viewers, welcome to the Ink Warfare YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be inking a drawing that I did of the G.I. Joe character Spirit. Spirit was always one of my favorite action figures as a kid. As you can see here, I still have the original card cut out from the packaging that has all of his information, like his file name is Charlie Ironknife. He's a tracker. G.I. Joe characters, like many classic characters like Batman or Spider-Man, had fairly simple designs, but they're memorable. And keeping your character simple helps to replicate them over and over again. I chose to do this drawing on this deleter paper. I ordered it online. It comes in a pack of 40 sheets. It's kind of an odd size. It's not quite 8.5 by 11. It's 8.25 by 11.75, I believe, or 182 millimeters by 257 millimeters. I don't know if I'd order this paper again. It's a little thin. It doesn't hold up very well when you erase too much, so it's good for practice. I did my initial drawing using this color erase pencil. It's just a blue. It's not the non-photo blue. The non-photo blues are really light. You can barely pick them up. I use this pencil holder here that I have wrapped in like a bandage tape. It's kind of soft and cushiony. I kind of stole this idea of wrapping the pencil holder from David Finch. I tend to get real tight in my drawing, and I wish I could be a little looser. So if I hold further back on the padding there, it helps me loosen up, especially my initial sketching, like laying this out in blue, laying out my drawings in blue pencil. For the lead pencil, I used a Rotring this is a 2H. Same thing. I've wrapped it with the foam padding. I've really been happy with this pencil. Now, as far as inking today, I'm going to be using a Tombow pen. It's the blue one. I really like these Tombow pens. The blue one's a little stiffer than the black one. The black one is a little soft. I just don't care for it. The blue ones you can usually buy individually at like Michael's, if there's a Michael's near you. I don't know what kind of store, arts and crafts store you'd have nearby. As a reference for this drawing, I used a photo I took of my son holding one of his airsoft rifles. Sometimes it's not possible to always get a reference, but I find it really valuable. I also used the action figure as reference. This is from my collection of action figures I've had since I was a boy. Now I find that the action figure doesn't always, his costume design and stuff, maybe the weapons don't always match the card art. So I'm going to stay pretty committed to the action figure design and less the card art. I'll still use the card art as reference. Now, I did not include Freedom the Eagle. I think some of you G.I. Joe diehards are going to be disappointed. I thought about adding him as a shadow there in the background, but for now I'm just going to leave him out. I'm sorry. Deep apologies on that one. Now, if you're doing something like this and you have the action figure, one thing that's kind of invaluable is having the weapons, which I still have, his rifle, and I can use that as a reference too and hold it up at the angle that it's going to be in the drawing to get an idea of how it looks in space. I can also use it to figure out my lighting on the weapon, which can be kind of tricky. Now, I'm going to speed up the video right now, just for sake of time. I like to start out outlining my drawing, and I'll use the Tombow pen here, and I'm going kind of thick and thin. You know, the areas in shadow are going to have a little bit of a heavier line, and areas that come up to the light are going to end up being thinner. Now we'll see how I do here. I have a difficult time just staying committed to one task on a drawing. I tend to start to branch off on little rabbit trails. That's all right. If you want to do that, it's really, as long as the overall drawing comes out the way you want, you can do some outlining, then jump off and do some rendering if you want. If you happen to see the camera shaking while I'm doing this, this is my first video. It's pretty low tech. I'm filming it on an iPad, if you're curious, and the iPad is mounted to a kind of a not the most stable holder, and it's right in front of my forehead. So if I lean forward a little, I might accidentally hit it. I apologize for that. Maybe if this channel takes off and becomes popular and more people start watching my videos, I'll invest in a better camera setup. But for now, I'm gonna stay committed to the iPad for recording. Other than, actually, I'm using the iPad for the soundtrack. I'm gonna make it in GarageBand, and all my editing's right now being done in iMovie. I've really kind of set a goal in most of my like comic book style artwork. I find that artists that use, I really appreciate artists that use like a 50-50 kind of value system where there's like almost 50% of the drawing is in darkness or shadow. And it's really interesting. Some artists who are really effective at this, how your eye can fill in the gaps, even if there's no highlight, as long as the rest of the drawing is convincing. Your eye kind of just fills in the gaps. Like I said, you could have an area that's completely black, and somehow, like say this backpack here, if I were to black that out, somehow your eye might fill in highlights that aren't even there. I think one artist that's really great at this is Lee Weeks. I've got a Batman issue here, number 51. He did I think a 3-issue series here. I love this series. Like, if you can pick this up, some great artwork. I mean, look at that cover. Not a lot of rendering, just very drastic values, you know, like shadows and lights with some highlights, and it looks great. I mean, the form, one thing that works for it is that the form is right too. I mean, he knows how to draw the figure, he knows anatomy. It just looks great. He's such a good cover artist, and I think in particular in more recent years, like I have a lot of his Daredevil stuff. I just like some of his most recent stuff. It just looks great. Sometimes it all depends on who's inking him too. But I mean, look at this. Look at this. I mean, this issue, in this series, I think Bruce Wayne is serving on a jury in a trial that involves Mr. Freeze. And I mean, look at this. Look at this drawing in the top right-hand corner here of Mr. Freeze. The top of his head, he's got it filled in. The lighting looks just fantastic, and all the wrinkles in his clothing. I think looks like a lot of this issue. I think it was inked by Lee Weeks. It's done predominantly, I would guess, with a brush, like an actual brush, not like a brush pen. I might be wrong. If I am, maybe somebody who's watching can fill me in. But even though sometimes there's not a lot of action in this issue, but his drafting and like just the layout of the panels just works. Like I said, I was kind of happy to pick these up somewhere, and I would definitely recommend these issues if you can find them. I don't think they're very difficult to find. So yeah, Lee Weeks, check them out. All right, so I'm moving on to one of my favorite things to draw are weapons. Not really. I kind of get kind of get bored with drawing weapons because you got to break out a rule. You have to break out a ruler sometimes to get things right. There's a certain aspect. There's an aspect of perspective that you have to keep in mind, depending on how you draw the weapon. If you just draw it at, if you draw it at a more dramatic angle, you have to make it convincing, and that involves perspective, which I love the way perspective looks. It can be really effective. Sometimes laying out perspective can be kind of a grueling thing. It's time consuming, but it's necessary in the end if you want your drawing to look effective. And this is where, like I had said earlier, this is where having a reference, like I have the little, albeit it's kind of, it's probably only, maybe 2.5 inches long, the toy rifle, but it does help. I can hold that up at the same angle, and that helps me maybe not have to spend so much time laying out something and with a ruler, laying out like a perspective. This ruler here I'm using is from Weems and Plath. I think it's like a nautical ruler. It helps with drawing parallel lines because it expands to about 5.5 inches and has little cork feet on it. I used to use something called the rolling ruler, if anybody's heard of that. I still have it, but I kind of like this Weems and Plath ruler a little better. It's a little more consistent. The rolling ruler can kind of trail off. I'm not sure if they still make the rolling ruler or not. I haven't seen one in the store in a while. So I was in a local co-op this weekend flipping through some comic book boxes, and I saw this issue of Savage Dragon at number 13. I had to have it. Look at this forearm. Holy cow, that's probably one of the best forearms I've ever seen on a comic book, or in a comic book, or on a comic book cover. This is drawn by Jim Lee, and I've never been a really big Savage Dragon fan. I was a big Image came out when I was a kid and at the height of my comic book collecting and interest. But look at this forearm. It's crazy. I don't know how anatomically correct it is. Well, actually, I kind of do. It's a little bit of a artistic license there on the forearm, but it just looks great. I love it. Jim Lee is one of my favorite comic book illustrators of all time, and there's a reason for that. Look at the gun that he drew here, this machine gun. Great detail. It's drawn in perspective. The angle's real dramatic. Look at this strap on Savage Dragon here. It doesn't just like a basic strap. It's got all kind loops and buckles. Changes width. I assume that's probably been all whipped up out of his own imagination. I might be wrong, but yeah, great cover. If you can find it, I'd snatch that up. I've in no way been endorsed by Jim Lee or Image Comics in any way. Now back to the drawing here. I'm really looking forward to drawing this forearm that I laid out in pencil here. I think it's going to look hopefully pretty decent in inks. I guess I'll let you guys be the judge of that. But like I said, I like drawing forearms. Kind of remind, back when I was a kid, I used to collect baseball cards, and some of the baseball players in those photographs on the cards, man, these guys would have gigantic forearms. Like they'd show them throwing a ball or holding a bat. Like a baseball card, great place to find reference for forearms. Because, to be a powerful hitter, it helps to have some pretty decent sized forearms so you can really snap the bat around. Adding some nice veins popping out of your biceps and forearms can be pretty effective too. One thing that I use for reference when it comes to musculature, I think it's like probably one of the greatest things out there, is this book by Arnold Schwarzenegger, the Encyclopedia of Modern Bodybuilding. It's filled with black and white photos, guys posing, guys lifting, I mean, it's a great anatomy reference, especially when it comes to, drawing comic book characters who are usually most often muscular. I'm kind of surprised I don't ever see anybody reference this book as a tool in figure drawing. But I've had it for a couple years now, and it's been a big help to me in that time. And the fact that the photos are all black and white just really helps you hone in on just the values, which is especially helpful when you're rendering in pen and ink or pencil. Now, my main background is in medical illustration. Um, and when you're drawing a medical illustration, you typically draw the light source from the upper left-hand side, shining down. So I tend to do that a lot in my drawings. If you notice here, like the forearm, the lighting is coming from the upper left-hand side. As I produce more videos, I'm going to end up changing that, because I mean, lighting can have a dramatic effect on film, on illustration. So the main light source for this illustration is going to be the upper left-hand side, and I just kind of imagine that he'd be out in the hot sun, maybe tracking one of the Cobra villains, and maybe a group of the G.I. Joe guys are waiting behind him as he works out the trail. I think trackers and a lot of like fictional media, like film, mostly in film, a lot of times, like, your tracker is kind of this cool, unique guy. He's got a skill that nobody else has. He can look at some terrain and be able to tell whether a man or a wolf or a horse passed by that way, when, what time, was it yesterday or 2 days ago. A lot of times there's some license used, like the tracker can tell whether the villain he's chasing had shaved in the last 3 days or something like that. But still, when you look at old westerns and even some military movies, they've used had trackers as characters. They usually have kind of cool costumes, different from other characters. Like Spirit's costume here is great. It's obviously has a lot of reflects some of the what's commonly thought of as a Native American outfit. His long hair, his headband, I think you'd call it a loincloth. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Now, somebody might. I did say earlier in the video that I use the action figure as my main reference for the costume, and some of you might point out that his loincloth is a little longer than it is in the action figure. I did take some license there and drew it a little longer. I just think it looks kind of cooler that way. It probably would look cool shorter too, but I just decided to do that here. But otherwise, I pretty much did keep pretty faithful, I think, to the action figure costume design. I am going to add, in the end, the stripe on his shoulder, or I intend to. That is something you could leave to the coloring phase if this was going to be colored. I don't plan on coloring it as of yet. I'm just mainly interested in the inking process and drawing process on my videos. I'm probably not going to get into color. That's a whole different thing. Now, hair can be a tricky thing to do. Some of my favorite artists, as far as hair goes, I always thought Whilce Portacio drew the best hair. Some of the hair, like when he used to draw the the Punisher's hair has never looked cooler than when Whilce Portacio had drawn it, or Portacio. I'm sorry if I butchered his name in any way, but yeah, I mean, Whilce has done some, like, even some of the issues of was it Uncanny X-Men? Great. I mean, he just is great at drawing hair, and he'd spend time drawing like individual strands. Some guys just kind of block it out, which you can, and that can be effective if you just block in. In your drawings here, when you're drawing a three-dimensional object or on two-dimensional space, and like say the figure per se, or the head, you have your general shape, which would be kind of a round oval shape, and then same with your arms. Your arms, when you break them down, are tubular. If you were to slice your arm, not to be gross, but look at a cross section of your arm, it's tubular in shape. So you take that, you want to keep that in mind, that you are drawing. There's your 5,000 feet details, like your general shape. Your forearms are kind of tubular and taper at the wrist. So if you were to draw like just a cylinder, think of them as a cylinder to start. So you're going to be rendering, that needs to be effectively rendered, like the overall values, how they would reveal themselves on a tube. And then you've got your like, let's just use the hair or the forearm. You go in for a closer view, and then you have your smaller details, and then you have your really fine details. So like, as far as the forearm's concerned, you might have the different striations of muscles, or the extensors in the forearm. So I believe, if memory serves me correctly, there's about 6 extensor muscles in the forearm. So then you break those up into different shapes, but they're also a part of the whole tubular structure. So it all has to work together. I think Jim Lee, I've heard him say that your muscles are pretty much like little footballs. A lot of the muscles are stretched out, different shaped footballs. I kind of like, I think of them as like bowling pins or something like that. They're shaped like, they are pretty bowling pin shaped for the most part. So like here in the shoulder, your shoulder is kind of to be general, is kind of a round ball, but then you have all these different striations of muscles in the shoulder, and so an effective drawing keeps in mind the whole shape, and how light would reflect off the shape, and your smaller details, like the different muscle striations as they're different parts of the muscle as they're broken up, and how light reflects off of those. Now I'm getting into the face here, and same thing with the face. You've got kind of a egg-shaped form, like maybe an upside down egg, and then you have all these smaller details built into it. Your eye sockets, your eyeball, the nose. Lights, like the light is hitting this face from the upper left side. It's going to cast shadows to the right, viewing the drawing. So I really like to draw defined cheeks. And I was talking to I was visiting with some family recently, and people that are a little bit older, and they're have a few more wrinkles in their face and stuff like that. They're great to observe as far as your detail in the face, in the faces, because a lot of that, their skin has kind of gotten a little thinner. So you can see a lot of the muscle structure in their face. It really, if you can do some reference drawing, or just sit down, while you're at a family gathering, and sketch some drawings of, ask Aunt Jane, or whoever's in your family, hey, do you mind if while you're sitting there, I do a little sketch of you, and just use that as a little study. get a better grasp on your muscle structure. How how do the eye sockets look? When I'm drawing eyes, I tend to line up the center corner of the eye, like the inside corner of the eye, with the outside tip of the nose. So if I was drawing, I find that usually is the case. Like your corner of your eye, the inside corner, does pretty much line up for the most part with the outside perimeter of the nostrils. So a lot of times if I'm just making something up, like I use my son for reference in this picture, but mostly just for the anatomical structure and to get the right pose, like a believable pose. But everything else I've kind of like Spirit's face here and stuff is just all out of imagination and what I know about human anatomy and facial structure. And it takes a lot of practice to get familiar with that. The one thing that I really struggle with still are hands are very difficult, especially if you're drawing hands in poses that you're not familiar with. And that's where reference can really help. I mean, you can just snap a picture of your own hand, and use that as reference. Or same thing, like someone that's a little more senior, they tend to have more definition in their hands, so you can see all the veins, you can see the ligaments, tendons, and that can be helpful to get more familiar with. How does like a muscle structure or your vascular system, like the veins and stuff, how do they look covered in skin? Not every one thing when you're drawing like something like this or doing a comic book illustration, it can be tempting to want to include every single muscle detail. And sometimes, that does. There are some illustrators that do that really well. It's not always necessary. There's some guys that, one of my, probably everybody's favorite. One of my favorite illustrators is Travis Charest, and when he was younger, he rendered, like he went into a lot of detail on rendering muscle structure. But if you follow his work as he's progressed and gotten older, I think there's less of an emphasis on every little muscle detail. The issues of Wildcats that he did, I think he did great faces. His hair, he does great hair, but he also, his forms are so believable, and the way that he renders everything, clothing, he's just fantastic. But actually, if you study, and every time I look at one of his illustrations, whether it's on Instagram or just if I crack open a book that he'd done, I just drool over him because he's just fantastic. But he doesn't go, a lot of times he doesn't go overly detailed into say what I'm doing with the forearm there. Or he might just draw a very basic form, but it's believable, because in life, unless like in that Arnold Schwarzenegger book, some of those photos are taken with lighting and with dramatic lighting. They're black and white. It brings out the shadows more. Who knows what was done to the contrast on the photos in publishing? But like in life, a lot of times you don't see all this detail. I mentioned the referencing some baseball cards, and in those photos, they're helpful because you do see a general idea of what the musculature of the forearm looks like, but they're not like it's super detailed like the Jim Lee illustration that I showed of Savage Dragon. And that can be effective too. Less can be more, and often is. But a lot of times when you're talking about comic books, people want to see that musculature. They want to see the license that artists take in drawing like a you know, guy with a huge chest and big deltoids and, you know, like thighs that are where you can see every single muscle. When I get into the legs on this, you know, you can see from the pencils, the one that leg, like it'd be his left leg. I went into a lot of detail, and that's going to be more in shadow. But the right leg, I kind of left kind of basic, and that can work too. Your structure can go a long way to making a drawing look convincing. So right now here in the video, I'm using a brush pen, and I just kind of happened to find these brush pens. I've never used them before. I was walking through Michael's, and they had, I think they had all of their brush pens on clearance. And so this is a Kuretake. Hoping I pronounced that right. It's a Kuretake Bimoji brush pen. And before that, I was using the Pentel Arts color brush pen. And I think this Kuretake one actually has a better tip on it. I like using it better. And I got these. I bought two of them. They were like $2 or $3 on clearance. I did buy another Pentel brush pen just because they were so cheap. But I've really been enjoying this pen. I haven't looked online to see who else carries them. But when the two that I have run out, I definitely will probably be buying another one. You know, there's more than one way to, as they say, to skin a horse. Maybe there's some brush pen that you've used that you found really effective. Feel free to share that in the comments. I might be open to trying one in a video to come. You know, as I brought up the topic of comments, you know, if there's something that you'd like me to show more in detail or produce a video that focuses specifically on one subject, let me know. I'm open to ideas and what's going to work best as far as what viewers are interested in. For this video, it's going to be kind of long because I'm going to show the whole inking process. And, you know, I like to turn on similar videos, and just draw myself and listen to the narration from the artist. You know, I watch, like I've mentioned before, I like Dave Finch's Monday Night Draw, and he hasn't done one in a while. I think he's working on a book with Robert Kirkman there, and that's maybe been taking up a lot of his time. But I look forward to, if he ever does come back and start doing those videos, I really look forward to it. I watched Daniel Warren Johnson's I think it's Friday with D-Dubs. You know, sometimes he doesn't even say a lot. He's just drawing, and you can put that on and let it stream while you're, you know, doing your own illustration. But the one thing that I find is like I've kind of starting to run out of things to watch in that vein. And that's where I thought, well, maybe I'll just start producing my own. I mean, I'm definitely not on the level of those guys. I'm just an amateur guy, you know, for the most part, an amateur comic book illustrator who just enjoys doing it. And thought I'd create some videos just to share that. And I know there's a big G.I. Joe fan base out there in the comic book world, and so I just decided to start doing these videos just to share my own illustrations. You know, I'm drawing them anyway. Why not record them and post them? Maybe somebody will appreciate them. Maybe not. I guess I'll find out. I do have a website called inkwarfare.com if you want to check it out. I plan on having this drawing for sale on there after the video is posted. I'll eventually have some t-shirts, stickers, and I currently have some other illustrations I've done and some trading cards that I've designed on there. I'm still figuring out what the website's going to be. I recently launched it. I also have an Instagram account. My Instagram handle is ink.warfare. So Ink Warfare was taken, so it's ink.warfare. I'm not currently on any other platform. But yeah, if you check out my webpage, inkwarfare.com, or Instagram, ink.warfare is my handle on there. Appreciate it if you do like this video, to like and subscribe. That will give me an idea of whether how far I should go producing more. I do have more of these G.I. Joe videos planned, and actually some of the illustrations already drawn, ready for ink. Now, if you'd like me to focus more on pencils, let me know in the comments. Am I talking too much? Let me know in the comments. Or if there's something you'd like me to talk about, or you're curious about, let me know. I'll be reading the comments, and I'll try to interact with as long as they're positive. If you leave a negative comment, I might read it, appreciate it, evaluate it for its validity. I suppose I'll probably get some negative comments. We'll see. But yeah, let me know. I'm going to get into drawing the belt here. His belt is pretty standard, I think, military issue, just like a basic olive belt that you'd pick up at a military surplus store, or if you had been served in the military. Thank you for your service. Probably be similar to a belt that I don't know what they use now. It's probably a little different. This is kind of like his belt's more of a World War II style or Vietnam era belt. If somebody knows the actual name of this type of belt with the kind of latch buckle, let me know in the comments. I'm not sure what they call it. I think sometimes it's referred to as webbing, but I might be wrong. I apologize. I didn't look up the official name ahead of time. I'm just trying to fill in the dead air with a little commentary here. So the one thing about the bottom of his shirt there, the bottom of the belt, that's going to have a heavier line because there's going to be a little bit shadow under it depending on how intense your lighting is. So that's one thing to keep in mind when you're doing your line work, is that what's going to be in shadow, and how can you bring some of the dimension out with your line thickness, or what you've hidden from the viewer and what they can see. Because like I said earlier, even things like shadows can be super effective at creating a convincing illustration if your shadows are effective and believable. Now he has a knife like a Bowie knife scabbard that we really can't see under his shirt there, so I'm just leaving the impression that it has some tassels on it, or some frills. I'm using on the shirt there, I used some upward slashes, trying to keep them fairly, not too thin. I don't use a lot of cross-hatching. I think cross-hatching can be really effective. Like Dave Finch does some great, I think he's one of the best cross-hatchers illustrating comics today. He does a really great job of it, but he's selective about it. He doesn't always do it, like he uses it like sometimes on his thighs, like his leg muscles. He might use it on some cross hatching on his biceps, and he tends to use they're pretty much perpendicular to themselves a lot of times, and that can look really nice. Now I'm trying to keep my feathering on the forearms fairly strong because I like that effect. But, where the light's not hitting the forearm, I just drew in, some narrower lines. But here up top, I'm just trying to keep that kind of old school feathering look rather than getting it too crazy with cross hatching. And I think it brings out the contrast in the forearm. Let me know what you think. Now, if you look, once my hand's out of the way, the bottom half, 50% of the forearm, has very few lights, and I think I'm gonna end up like the veins there aren't quite in shadow yet. I'll be fixing that in a little bit. Feathering on the shirt there is pretty much the same thing. I'm just using some bolder feathering rather than some thinner, more tightly spaced lines. And then as I move on to the thigh here, the upper leg, I'm going to use some heavier feathering here too. Just makes a bolder statement. And actually, you can say more with less because I'm using less lines than if I were to really go in there and heavily render it. Not to bring up Whilce Portacio again, but he really was great at drawing leg muscles. A lot of definition. He used some cross hatching and stuff though, but it was really effective. Now for the cloth here, I could either, this for the most part would be in shadow. I could probably just black this all out. I'm going to get heavier with the blacks on the inside of the leg here, but I did want to leave all the wrinkles in the cloth there. Same thing with the leg muscle. It's kind of as I spoke about earlier with the forearm. It's a tubular structure for the most part when you generalize it. So our light source was coming from the upper left-hand side, so the upper left-hand side of the leg is going to be more in highlight. I moved on to the headband here, which I want to make kind of wrinkly to give it some texture. So I'm using the brush to bring in some line work, some heavier lines. I'll come back and feather those in a little bit. Right now I'm just looking at where I can fill in with this brush, with some heavier areas, so I don't have to take as much time to fill them in with like the Tombow pen or like a smaller pen. You do have to be careful with these brush pens. They're really pointy at the end, so they don't want to fill. It's not as easy to fill. You have to really plot out your line. One of the things that I most remember, it shouldn't be, but one of the things I remember one of my art instructors said in college, it's always stuck with me, is you've always want to know where your line is going ahead of time. So and I've always found that to be helpful, to visualize the path of your line. You know, when you're driving a car, or I like to motorcycle, if you're going around a sweeping bend, if you look at the road right in front of just in front of your bumper or front tire, or if you're on a mountain bike on a trail and you're going around a turn, it helps to look down the road rather than focus right on what's in front of you. I mean, you want to know if there's anything that's going to be an issue, like stones in the road or anything like that, but you can better take that turn if you look further down the road, and you can navigate it, and usually navigate it with higher speeds because you're not as fixated on the road in front of you, and that can be the case with drawing. You know, you want to know where your line is going ahead of time, and that can be a big help. Can keep you from having to erase things over and over again. Keep you from having to make mistakes like here, having to go in with some white out and correct some issues. So like I try to keep in mind, okay, at what angle can I place this pen to paper where I'm going to get the most effective line covering my pencils here. And that may mean spinning the paper. Or holding my wrist at a different angle. But the more you can pre-visualize things, it can be helpful, or it usually is helpful. Now the left leg, I'm going to go into more detail, rendering, doing some more feathering. It's kind of more in the foreground than the right hand leg is. So because it's more forward, I'm going to spend more time rendering some detail. And this kind of goes back to what I said earlier too. You don't have to. You can just treat that leg as if it's a, just render as if it's a tubular structure. You know, he's probably, if this was real life and Spirit was a real person wearing this outfit, I'd assume that those his pants are probably made out of like deer hide or something like that. So they probably wouldn't conform to every muscle in his leg, and maybe his legs, depending on what your depiction of him might be, his legs might not be as well defined. But I like definition, and for this illustration, that's what I'm going to go with. I guess I got bored with the leg there, so now I'm jumping over to the loincloth again. Now he has a really honking buck knife or Bowie knife on his leg there, and the handle looks like it's made out of some kind of antler, like possibly a deer antler or mule deer, or probably maybe whitetail, because I think mule deer antlers aren't as gnarly at the base. So like whitetail deer antlers tend to be really gnarly. Not that I have much experience with mule deer antlers, but from what I've seen on TV, they don't seem to be as gnarly. Now, going back over to the hand here. Now the hand I want to leave kind of veiny, and I want the knuckles to be pronounced. Hands can be difficult. You can go over the top with hands, and then it just looks kind of messy. When doing hands, I kind of find it helpful to think about the bone structure underneath and the tendons, because that's what gives hands the pronounced look, like your tendons coming across the backside of your palm, the backside of your hand there, and then the fingers. You know, if you keep in mind the shape of the bones in the fingers, that sometimes helps to get a better visualization of what you're doing with the hands. But you should also sit down and just draw hands. I mean, I've got pages and pages in my sketchbook. You know, one sketchbook of just hands that I've drawn, just to get a better handle on it. You can take photographic reference of your own hands, you know, your wife or kids or whoever, you know, family member, friend, you know, say, hey, can I take a few pictures of your hands, and then just work from those. It might be helpful too when you're taking those pictures to think about your lighting. You know, try to keep the lighting a little more dramatic, so there's more shape to the forms in the hand. It'd help you better accentuate them. And you know, when you're doing a drawing like this, you know, you want there to be kind of some dramatic lighting, and that brings out the forms more, rather than just a flat light that makes everything look flat. If your lighting and your reference is good, that makes it much more easier when you go to put pen to paper or pencil to paper, rather than having to create like shadow and form. So now I'm going in and shading in the veins here, because the veins in the forearm here are going to stick out, you know, more than the muscle tissue usually. So it's going to have a higher highlight, but it's not going to be as bright as anything that's on the top of the forearm, closer to the light source. Now I'm back to some of the more, you know, boring aspects of the drawing for me. You know, drawing the weapons. I mean, some people really like tech, and it's you know, whether you like it or not, it's something that you have to do. You know, if you're drawing like this, like Spirit's a soldier, he's gonna have some weapons. You know, I like drawing swords more than I like drawing all the little technical aspects of drawing like a rifle or a pistol, but you got to do it. And I'm kind of trying to decide how far I'm going to go as far as shading, because a lot of times, you know, something like a weapon or car or whatever, you've got more geometric shapes. The planes don't have very many, like very much variation in them. So sometimes it can be effective to just draw. If you're drawing a rifle, just line draw it. You know, maybe shade the bottom of it. You know, add some shadow dimension to it. But you know, in the end, if it's going to be colored, you know, just drawing a basic line drawing of a weapon, like a rifle like this, can be effective, rather than going in and trying to do a bunch of shading and then it looks kind of generic. I'm not at a place where I really feel like going to that much detail on this rifle. So other than the scope and like the barrel that are rounder, like the more, you know, angular forms on the rifle, I'm just gonna pretty much resolve to leave those drawn with just basic lines. So I recently went to see the new Fantastic Four movie. Um, I liked it. It was. I thought it was pretty well done. The acting was good. Um, yeah, I mean, I definitely don't have a lot of complaints about it. I didn't know what I was going to think about the Silver Surfer character. Um, but I think it worked, and I think I heard somebody say that they didn't even actually call her the Silver Surfer, so they're leaving that door open in the future to actually bring in the male version of the Silver Surfer. But yeah, I thought it was entertaining. I mean, what did you think? Let me know in the comments. Um, like I said, I appreciated the acting. I'm not sure what I thought about like Ben Grimm's beard. I have a beard, but maybe somebody can enlighten me. I don't know whether he ever had a beard in the comics or not. The Fantastic Four is not really my favorite team, like Marvel team. I I have Carlos Pacheco did a run on the Fantastic Four, and I really liked the artwork. I think that was like in my opinion, the height of like his career. I don't know whether it was the inking and I didn't look up before I didn't even think about I was going to mention this, but I don't know whether he did his own inking on those issues or somebody else did, but I thought he did a fantastic job on his run on the Fantastic Four. But other than that, I've never been a big Fantastic Four person. I've always liked the X teams better. And maybe that's because of the time period that I got into collecting comics. The X books were the books to have, when Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld and Wills and Mark Silvestri, when they were all drawing for Marvel, those were like the best books. I don't know whether you're more apt to be a bigger Fantastic Four fan if you grew up in the 70s or even were collecting in the earlier 80s. That might be the case. I think it might depend on the time period, who was drawing those issues, writing. But I can appreciate the Fantastic Four and the history of the Fantastic Four as far as Marvel anthology goes. But yeah, never my favorite team. Now, like, is the Fantastic Four going to be a movie that I watch over and over again? Probably not. It's not like Winter Soldier, or I mean, I don't know how many times I've seen Winter Soldier. That's probably one of my favorites, or Endgame. But I think it was well done for the most part. You might disagree. I also saw the new Superman movie recently, and I like that too. I mean, it's not one of my favorites, but it still wasn't terrible. The acting was really well done. The writing for the most part, I think, was well done. I did feel like I was kind of, as a viewer, you're kind of dropped into a story you're dropped into like part 2 of a comic series. Like, so if there was a series of 4 issues covering the story you were in, you missed the first issue, so you're starting in on the second issue. So I thought there should have been a little bit more development in the beginning. I wasn't looking for an origin story or anything like that. But yeah, I like the actor that portrayed Superman. I mean, everybody was good. I kind of really liked Mr. Terrific, and he's one of the characters I know the least about. I'm familiar with Guy Gardner because I've got a bunch of Green Lanterns and Superman, Hawkgirl. I'm not familiar with that version of Hawkgirl, but yeah, I liked how Mr. Terrific was portrayed in the movie. He was kind of one of my favorites. Definitely. I mean, I grew up in an era where the Christopher Reeves Superman really had a huge influence. When I was a kid, I had the Mego Superman doll that kind of resembled him, and I also had this. I can't remember if it was a Remco Superman toy that had like I had a Batman, a Spider-Man one. I might have had the Batman one. The Superman one, I think it came with like some kind of kryptonite rock. Like it was a little green plastic kryptonite rock. And none of the arms or legs moved on those things. I can't remember what Superman did. Maybe if you remember, you could fill me in. But it's hard to top, Christopher Reeves as Superman. And it's a daunting task to set out to do so. Now, I did like Man of Steel a lot. I've watched Man of Steel several times, and I'll probably watch it several times more. I know people thought it was a little darker, but I kind of liked Henry Cavill as Superman. Yeah, Zod was a great character in that movie. I thought that was really well done. The one thing that I liked about the new Superman movie being a little lighter, and I mean this has been mentioned, probably over mentioned, but yeah, and Superman Man of Steel, you're thinking about all this, these fight scenes in Smallville, and then later on Metropolis, the mass casualties. You can't help but thinking about that as those scenes, and even the next movie addressed that. That's one thing I liked about the newer movie, that Superman went through great lengths to try to keep every possible person or animal from being injured. And Superman has always been kind of a lighter-hearted character, not as dark as Batman, and they both they both operate on the principle that they're not going to kill anybody. But Superman still has this, small town farm boy persona that, like I said, is more lighthearted, and I thought that came across in the new movie, and that's one of the things that people like about Superman, that he isn't as dark of a character, in my opinion. I know there's probably been some issues that were fairly dark and more gritty depending on who authored them in the comics. But did I like the new Superman more than Man of Steel? Probably not. But I need to watch it again. It's I think now it's on streaming, but I'll probably wait till the price comes down to watch it again. I'm not going to pay $20 on Amazon to watch it again, or I'll buy the DVD when it comes out. Now, we're going to assume that Spirit would have a little bit more, and I think it's portrayed in the card art, that, he's going to probably spend a little bit more time in the desert, in the sun. He's going to have some darker skin. So there are going to be more highlights, and some of his muscle structure is going to be more visible because of that. People that are tan, that's why a lot of these bodybuilders and stuff like to go into competition with tans, or they go, whether they... however they achieve it, through going to a tan, laying in a tanning bed or laying out in the sun, but it does accentuate your muscle details. So that's why I'm going to these lengths with Spirit, to accentuate, like even in his forehead here. I'm going to develop the wrinkles there above the headband, just to bring out all those the little muscle structures. And it gives it a believability. I am shooting for more realism in this. It's not as a cartoony drawing. Sometimes I wish I could be a little bit more loose and cartoony and basic, because when you get caught up in a lot of detail, it becomes more time consuming. And depending on what you do, you got to be really careful that things are more believable depending on your style. Whereas if you're going with more of a graphic style, like something that's more like a cartoon, more generalities, sometimes you can get away with more when something's more stylized. Like if you're drawing a leg or a face or whatever, if it's you're coming from more of a loose cartoony goal, you know, if it doesn't quite look right, people are going to be more forgiving, I think. But if you're trying to make your drawing look realistic, you know, people are going to be more like, oh, I don't know, maybe that, you know, that forearm doesn't look quite right, or those arms are just too long, or you know, your legs are kind of distorted. Whereas if you're more stylized, people are going to expect that. But if you're shooting for realism, I don't think it's going to be expected as much. People are going to expect realism, you know, something to look realistic. There are artists who have, you know, have mixed that up. You know, they toe the line between realism and, you know, more highly stylized artwork. I think over the years, maybe Jay Lee has been like that. He does a lot of covers now with a similar motif. But years ago, he did a run on the Inhumans, and his shading and his blocking in were always really stylized, but it had this realistic feel to it. So I'd recommend, you know, checking out Jay Lee. He's a fantastic artist. Now the deltoid muscle is always, I enjoy drawing that. You know, there's particular structure to the muscle striations in it. And I know like this isn't the best illustration to see how I normally draw it, but it is kind of more ball shaped depending on how muscular the character you're drawing is. And you can really bring that out with some, you know, shadows at the base. And then you go in with your finer details and highlight the various muscle striations there. And it can be really fun illustrating the deltoid muscles. Now I'm going to get back into the deltoid here. I'm going to use a little cross-hatching.
Cross-hatching here.
I think two artists that are really good at deltoids are like Bart Sears. His overall deltoid structure is I would recommend referencing his artwork. And then, you know, Dave Finch does a great job with them.
I'm just going to do a little cross-hatching here on the top.
This might be some of the only cross-hatching that I do on this illustration. Kind of running out of things to say here, so if there's some quiet moments in the video, I do have background music playing. So, and like I said, if there's something that you'd like me to talk about in the videos, just let me know in the comments.
Bring some of this, a little bit more shadow down on this headband, from this headband here into the hair. Make it a little bit more shading on there. Same here. I'm trying to bring these knuckles out a little bit more. And this vein right here in his arm, I'm going to add a little bit. Looks kind of flat, so as it gets more under the arm there, I'm going to make some of it disappear. So I'm getting down to the point where it's like
The other day I was
stuff.
doing
gotta finish
our laundry
rendering the
and
legs here. So I'm gonna do that.
I found a jersey that my son had just bought from, I think he got it from Walmart. It was a Spider-Man jersey, and it had an old, I think it was a John Romita Sr. Illustration of Spider-Man on it. And I was looking at it, I'm like, man,
Which that can work.
it just looks incredible the way
But it can be effective if
the
you go
muscles, the rib cage,
rib
and his
striations. I might do that here.
bicep
This is
and the thighs were feathered,
gonna be in
and it was
shadow.
feathered with, you know,
So if I take muscle fibers,
back then it was more common, I think, usually to use like a heavier feather line, and it didn't even, you know, the feathering didn't come to a point. It was more of a rounded feathering, and I'm going to try that out maybe in one of the next videos. I didn't do it here, but there was like a heavier shadow, so the, like say I was working on the thigh here, the part in shadow might have been more blacked out. The base of the vastus medialis muscle here would have been really heavily in shadow to kind of bring out the contrast. You know, back then they didn't have micron pens and stuff like that, things that we have, so they were basically inking with brushes and nibs.
muscle.
Some people still do that today. When I was in high school, I used a nib a lot. Like, I used to go to the art room and just draw, pick out a picture in a magazine. Like I had this one illustration I did of all you know, just faces of famous people. I did that all with a nib pen. So the tools have changed a little bit, but man, this John Romita Sr. illustration on the jersey just looked great.
More pronounced. Another thing that I'm doing here that can be effective. See how I'm stopping short of this line here, and I'm just dropping in some texture. Gives that little highlight. You know, if you do look at.
Like I said earlier, with this leg, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail rendering.
That kind of effect. There's some highlights.
Spend a little bit more time
The crevice between
feathering in some lines here. I don't know, I might be going over the top on this femoris muscle here. You know, if you look at a lot of bodybuilders, it's pretty highly defined and splits into two here. The definition is has that the dividing line down the center, kind of down the center. I think I was using one of the photos from that Arnold Schwarzenegger book as reference for here, and I decided to just go for it and really highly define the muscles. We'll see how it works out. I'm using finer lines here. This is an extra small Faber-Castell. Yeah, I really haven't said anything about the ink, you know, other ink pens I'm using. I'm using like that extra small Faber-Castell pen. I've got a 0.3 and one they call just an S. I don't know what they base their, you know, some of their pens have the actual size. Some of their pens just have like an XS or an S. And I don't know whether that has anything to do with maybe some of my pens are a little older and some are a little newer and they decided to go to different sizing system. And then I do use micron pens. I have a variety. I guess my favorites, I mean, I like the 05s, 03, and the finer ones. I don't have any of the finer ones because I've got to purchase some new ones, and I've been trying to use up these Faber-Castells. I kind of like, you know, the ink in the Faber-Castell seems to be a little darker. I don't know. It does seem to be the case. But maybe I'm wrong about that. But I'm not partial to one over the other as far as the microns. And I haven't really used any other manufacturer. I do have some Staedtlers. The Staedtlers are okay. Actually, I think I have some Staedtlers that I've had for like 20 years and they still work. I haven't used them up yet. As far as the overall broad use, this pen I'm using right here, the blue Tombow pen, I mean, you can go thick to thin within a certain range. So it is the most versatile pen, I think, that I use and have used in this video. They're great pens. They last a while. The tip does start to round out after a little while, but overall, that'd be my top. If you could only pick one pen to use, I'd probably use that Tombow pen. Now here I'm using a Staedtler. I bought this to experiment with. It's more of like a spaded or a brush pen, and I kind of like this. I think I had gotten that because I saw Daniel Warren Johnson using one of those parallel pens, and which I did buy, and I haven't taken it out of the packaging yet. But I bought the Staedtler pen in the meantime, and it does work for some applications, like here where I put that wide line on the scabbard here. And you can tip it to the side and get some thinner lines out of it too. Not like you would with the Tombow, but it can be kind of fun to use. There's so many brushes on the market, and you can get caught. It's kind of like, you know what, oil painting. I like to oil paint. It's for me because I like detail and more realism in my artwork. It takes me a long time to produce an oil painting, whereas I can sit down and do, you know, a drawing like this in a few hours. So I don't do as many oil paintings just because it takes up so much time that I don't have. But I've come down in oil painting to just using, you know, your primary colors and mixing all my colors. Because you go to the store and there's, you know, hundreds of different tubes of paint that you can buy. And it can get expensive. So I just tend to use the primary colors. I don't have to worry about, oh, did I run out of, you know, some obscure color that I needed. I just you just teach yourself how to, if you're into oil painting, you know, teach yourself how to mix the colors. That way, you know, if you go somewhere, they might not have, you know, you're out of town or your favorite art store closes, and the next closest store in the area might not have the color that you're dependent on. That's where like mixing things can come in handy. And the same with the pens here. You know, I kind of would like to try to keep to, you know, a minimal number of pens that work for me, because I'm somebody, I go to the grocery store, and, you know, you see like 30 different barbecue sauces, and it's hard to pick out a barbecue. You know, you're looking at them all, and, you know, 20 are definite no's, but then there's 10 where you just can't decide. And I have a hard time deciding that, you know, like when it comes to that kind of stuff. So it's better for me to keep it simple. And like I said, if I could pick one pen to use, it'd be that Tombow pen. Now, there might be something like that from another manufacturer that's even better. I'd be curious to know. If you know of something that's better, let me know in the comments. I tend to like to think about fingers as less like tubes and more like little, bars, rectangular bars. And I think that helps you define the planes in the fingers a little bit more sometimes, whereas, you know, your side of your finger is its own plane, the top is its own plane, and that might be helpful for you to think of fingers that way. And then, you know, to not forget your knuckle bulges, and right below those bulges, like say with these fingers, there's a little bit of a shadow there, you know, that helps bring the fingers out. I'm not going to say that these are the best fingers ever done. I probably could have done better. Right now I'm kind of just getting to like the punch list of like little things that I've been putting off, like dealing with this gun. I've been putting off the gun. Because like I said, drawing weapons like rifles and stuff, even though I find them cool and stuff, they're not my favorite to draw. And that's probably just because I'm being lazy. It takes a lot. I think it takes a lot more effort to draw stuff like this, to draw vehicles. You know, even your backgrounds, like to draw houses and buildings and stuff. It can be kind of dull, but you can make it interesting. You know, you don't have to draw your standard, depending on the time you have, you don't have to draw your standard general, you know, building or like 4-story building or house or car. You can make it interesting to draw, and that might help you get past that the boring, you know, oh, I really like drawing, I really like drawing the figure. I got to draw this car in the background, or this house in the background, or the cityscape in the background. I really don't want to do it. I want to get back to drawing the figure. Well, if you have that perspective, it has to happen, so why not make it interesting? Why not be creative about it, see it through and get it done, instead of just like phoning it in and doing the bare minimum? In the end, you'll probably have something that's more interesting if you spend a little more time on the background, as long as it doesn't take away from what's going on in the foreground and become distracting. Now I'm getting to the end of my drawing here, just working on punch list stuff. And for the next drawing, next video, I'll be inking the G.I. Joe character Bazooka. So maybe Bazooka was your favorite character growing up. You won't want to miss that video. As this video draws to a close, I just wanted to remind you to check out my website, inkwarfare.com, or my Instagram page, ink.warfare. I don't have a lot on there yet on the Instagram page, just because I wanted it to coincide with this video. So I'll be posting more and more content to that. Please like, subscribe this video. I'm just going to close out with some smaller details. This drawing will be available for sale on my website if you're interested in it. And don't forget, at the end of your drawing, you can go in with your kneaded eraser and erase your pencils out, clean the drawing up so it scans easier if you're gonna go to print or color. And just be careful if you're using this deleter paper, that kneaded eraser tends to grab a hold of the paper and it can wrinkle it up pretty easy. But thanks for watching. I really appreciate it if you made it to this point. And let me know what you think in the comments section at the end of the video. Thank you.